and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in the Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information is in the description of the video, so kindly go through it. And now to the discussion. India and the European Union on Saturday announced their decision to resume negotiations for a balanced and comprehensive trade agreement after a gap of 8 years and unveiled an ambitious connectivity partnership during a virtual meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and leaders of 27 member nations of the bloc. In his remarks, Prime Minister Modi invited the EU to support a proposal by India and South Africa to waive patents on COVID-19 vaccines so that there can be equitable vaccine access for the entire world. However, there was no concrete decision on the matter from the EU side, and the meeting, participated by leaders of EU member states as well as the top leadership of the EU, also decided to launch negotiations on two other key agreements on investment protection and geographical indications. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the status of India-EU ties. Joining me on the program today are Umu Salma Bawa, Center for European Studies, JNU, Pramit Pal Chowdhury, Foreign Editor of the Hindustan Times, and Jitendra Nath Mishra, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. How would you look back at the developments on the trade front as far as India and the EU are concerned? This is something that we've been waiting for a long time now. Finally, it seems like a step in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Frank, for inviting me on your program once again. It's a great pleasure to be back. Yes, of course, this opens the door to the negotiations of the free trade agreement that have stalled since 2013. That's a major political step forward. It's not a trade step or an economic step because a lot still waits to be accomplished in terms of detail. But it's a step forward. It's a matter of intent shown by both the sides to take this forward. So this is the biggest outcome of this virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and the European Union yesterday. Now, what is happening on trade? Now, resilient supply chains, vaccines, APIs, they're talking about cooperation on this. Obviously, because of the pandemic, it's very urgent, it's very present. Free, open, inclusive, and rules-based Asia-Pacific, which is something that is directly connected with the challenge of China and the threat of China, and indeed the aggression of China in the South China Seas. So we are on board on that. Geographical indications, for example, Darjeeling tea linked to Darjeeling, things like that, or Champagne linked to the Champagne district of France. So that's an important measure. Then connectivity partnership, again, very important. And this also has a lot to do with China because the Indian spokesman or somebody in our Foreign Office has made a statement that they will look for joint infrastructure projects in the Asia Pacific, in Central Asia, and in Africa. So that's a game changer because they haven't been talking about these things in the past. So that's a huge takeaway. Now, trade. What are we looking at? Trade between the two countries is $160 billion, almost equally balanced, half on each side. So it's not a political problem for India to talk about increase in trade because it's not a relationship that's skewed in favor of the other party, as in the case of China. So that's a huge political problem. Here, there is no political problem. 6,000 European companies create 1.7 million jobs in India, according to Politico magazine. I just read that. There was an article by Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Costa in Politico magazine. It's excellent. So it sets out the roadmap, plus the joint statement, which talks of everything: climate change, AI, cooperation in the information domain, in pharmaceuticals, of course, and everything that there is. This is a kind of relationship that's on par, I would say, with the relationship we have with the United States, where we discuss all global issues, which was not the case 10 or 20 years back as far as the European Union was concerned. So,
Right.
yes, so I think this is a very important step, but it is only a step.
Okay, absolutely. It's only a step, a baby step, still miles to go and lots more to be done. Talking about lots more to be done, let me bring in Salma Bawa into the picture. Where do we go from here? A first step has been taken. How do we reach the top?
Thank you, Frank. So, as the ambassador laid out, I would say there's a very ambitious looking ahead. You could look at the joint statement in particular, and it clearly lays out that there will be a resumption in terms of trade. And what's important to note over here is everything has not been put into one basket, which was like the case last time. So very importantly, I think there is an attempt at disaggregating all of it. So there is a resumption on trade is separate, and then you're looking at investment and you're looking at a connectivity partnership. Now, if you look at the details, then I think that is where all of these things will come down to in terms of how do you connect it up. I think there are three important areas over here. One, I would say, is how resilient is going to be this kind of this cooperation in the light of the pandemic. We are in 2021. Last year at this time, we were talking that we will be in a very different world. I think that is no longer the case. I think the guessing game is going to continue with us, at least for us in India. I think we are looking at a long haul now, which also means any prognosis on how the economy is going to shape up, what it does in terms of purchasing power to people, what it does in terms of even making a vaccine affordable, and we talk about vaccine equity. All of that is a big question mark. Why do I say that? Because you've just had the G7 foreign ministers meeting, and they were very hesitant on the issue of IPR on the vaccines, right? Very next day, immediately, the US President Biden says, we are willing to waive it off, but the EU is still reluctant. So this is the backdrop. The pandemic will continue to be the backdrop as we navigate. What is good is that we are not losing political, I think, direction. As the ambassador pointed out, it was very important that we keep our dateline with the summit. And I see that as being critical to the next steps. So I think there is a political willingness in New Delhi and in Brussels, as others are lining up to tie up their trade agreements. India has to think of what it wants when it is looking at 2022 now. I think that's extremely important. The COVID impact apart, I think it's also about how prepared are you to make use of what is coming on the other side. And I think what is coming on the other side is what is also importantly pointed out, that there is this whole dimension of the digital economy is going to be transformed even as we speak. Work from home and hybrid economic models are going to be the order of the day. Production lines, diversified supply chains are already getting into order as we speak. So I think that is extremely important. Transport, and a very important is face-to-face. So what we're also seeing is people-to-people connections are picking up. The economy of tomorrow is being designed today, but we need a far more lot of hands on board to do that, because especially if in the pandemic response you've seen, the state is one player, very, very important player on all sides. But ultimately, it comes down to how we harness community, how do you bring chains and networks into it. And that's going to be the story for also the economy. That's going to be the story also of how we create investment agreements which are robust enough. And also, how do we, provide for some low-hanging fruits to come through? I think that will be very important. It will build trust. It will enable partnership. And also then looking at how, expanding some of it to taking it in terms of the connectivity partnership.
Right.
Let me leave it at that for the first round.
Absolutely. So, Pramit, let me bring you into the picture now. Would you say that the developments that we've seen in the recent past are being done with an eye on China as well, both from the EU and India?
Oh, yes, definitely. Some of it, the connectivity and infrastructure program is very clearly aimed to provide an alternative to the Belt Road Initiative. That's the prime, and it very clearly talks about sustained debt sustainability and so on, which is exactly the primary criticism that is levied against Chinese BRI. projects. There's a smaller mention about the Indo-Pacific, but the continuing weakness with the European Union, of course, is that the military strategic side will always lag far behind not only what we do with the United States or even Japan, but even with individual European countries. I mean, our defense relationship with France now is far in advance of the European Union, but that's obviously because of the nature of the EU itself. But there is an Indo-Pacific reference that is there. And you have to realize that a lot of what is done on the technology side, whether it's on artificial intelligence or COVID vaccines and so on, part of that in the shadow, what we're seeing now on the vaccine side, if you look at what we have done with the United States, what we have done with Britain before the EU summit, and now with the EU summit, India has been brought in the COVID vaccine issue, the Quad as well, and said, look, you need to help increase India's productive capacities on vaccines, not only in terms of investing money, but in terms of giving us, as Professor Bauer mentioned, a patent waiver, or at least a waiver on specific ingredients for the vaccines, more than the vaccines themselves, plus cooperate with us in terms of technology and so on, because what we all so far indicates that the mutations that are taking place with this virus indicates that it's going to keep coming back. And if by chance, and this is completely feasible, the vaccine develops any form of ability to withstand the virus develops the capacity to withstand the vaccines that we have right now, then automatically we will be back to square one as far as the pandemic is concerned. So we need to be moving ahead. The vaccine has to be changed as rapidly, if you wish, as the virus itself, and that has to be a global effort. But what we are seeing is a very clear division in which China is not part of that equation. India is not working with China. The West is refusing to work with China, partly because of China's long legacy of stealing technology, and partly because China is not very good with vaccines. Its present vaccines are functional, but have very low efficacy rates. So you have to use a lot more of them. So there's a very clear divide. And so a coalition, if you wish, of a number of different countries moving into vaccine politics, if you wish, is developing. And India, in many ways, is at the heart of it because we've always been the world's biggest producers of vaccines. So we're looking for partners in that front. And I think the European Union, because it incorporates a number of countries, normally Germany, France, some of the Nordic countries, who are among the world's most powerful or leading pharmaceutical and medical research and technology sites.
Right.
So have that built into it. And again, China to some degree is in the background of that.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that vaccines and the COVID pandemic is definitely high on the agenda as far as democracies around the world are concerned. But, Ambassador, I'd like to draw your attention to a point that the professor was making about low-hanging fruit. And do you believe that that's where we need to start, get the smaller issues on track, get them sorted, and then we can look at some of the big-ticket ideas or big-ticket issues?
Well, they are not looking at low-hanging fruit right now, and they made it very clear that the discussions, at least what I've read in the media, the discussions talked about two approaches. One is the approach that we just followed with Britain the other day, which is have a limited kind of a trade deal, announce it as a positive development, and then negotiate the far more difficult free trade agreement. But here the decision has been clearly to talk about a long-term FTA without, in fact, talking about low-hanging fruit. So there the division is very clear. There is no ambition to have a short-term deal right now. It's very, very clear. Now, why? We can ask ourselves the question as to why is this the case? Well, firstly, we talked about China. There is a kind of a concert of democracies that's going to emerge. Yes, we know that. And the G7, we hear, breathless reports about the G10 morphing into a D10, G7, sorry, morphing into a D10 and that kind of thing. But I don't think it's going to happen. Now, when we talk of China, the EU has a very complex relationship with China, and it resembles Britain. Britain had the other day the review, the strategic review. It's talking of threats from China, but also a partnership with China and cooperation where possible and competition where necessary. That exactly is the EU's approach as far as what we have read. Because as far as vaccine diplomacy is concerned, to your question, the US has stolen a march over the EU after the somewhat tardy start in terms of patents, in terms of temporary transfer of patents, which is a game changer because the country to benefit most from this will be India. There is a fear that China will benefit equally because China also has the same kind of manufacturing infrastructure in place as India does. But of course, the poorer countries will not benefit as much. That's exactly why President Macron and Angela Merkel very clearly said, and other EU representatives clearly said, that the top priority should be ramping up manufacturing capability in other countries, and patents, temporary transfer of patents is not necessarily the way forward because it doesn't help that process. Now, India says just the opposite. So here, the US has certainly stolen a march and has committed to transfer 65 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine to the rest of the world, primarily to India, I hope. But the EU has made no such announcement, at least at this summit or at this meeting, though the EU has given 200 million doses of vaccines to the rest of the world out of, I think, 400 to 450 million doses that it had in stock. So the EU has been fast off the block. India has given only 70 million doses. And now we are stuck because we have the pandemic raging across in our own country. So we had to put a pause on that. So I think where China is concerned, there is a differing perception between India and the EU, if we read carefully, and we also need to be very mindful of that, and we need to be very realistic about that. Trade, tariffs, patents, data security, Indian professionals, these are going to be the challenging issues in any case in the FTA. So there are major issues, and of course non-tariff barriers from India's point of view, such as the EU invoking child labor to stop imports from India. That kind of human rights issues coming in, they appear to be altruistic, but they're not. There is a underlying intent as far as trade is concerned. So all these are going to be challenges, and I'm not sure how much we can really challenge China together by having these partnerships. But yes, alternative supply chains and the supply chains resilience initiative that the Indo-EU summit talked about is an alternative to China. But we have to see results, and it's not going to be easy. Quad had the same kind of initiative,
sure.
and also the India, Australia, Japan resilience supply chain initiative. So all this is going to take years to actually have some actual results on the ground. So I would stop there. Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Salma Bawa, let's talk about a couple this aspect. Especially the Indo-Pacific and how EU's strategy towards the Indo-Pacific has changed gradually, at least in the recent past, after the pandemic broke out. But because of reasons listed out by the ambassador, because of why Europe or the EU has a complex relationship with China, how far will they go in the Indo-Pacific, and how much do they see India as a strategic partner, especially in the region?
Okay, so you could say that the EU is one of the later entrants, because of the entire nature of the beast itself. It is primarily an economic actor to start with. It has grown in political stature, but the military dimension, which would be extremely critical as one of the components in the Indo-Pacific, that throws a very different kind of impact. But I think you would have to look at it in a larger way. The EU augments what I would say as what is the capacities of the member states. And it's very interesting. You've seen the Netherlands, France, and Germany, put forward. UK is out of it. Recently announced it's still to the Indo-Pacific. Now, France is an Indo-Pacific power, very much so. It is a resident power. The others are, if you leave the document separately, then you could look at it as a divide of the work. There's a very heavy, investment, trade, and business focus coming out from the German side. The French are far more strategic in what they are saying. And the EU is, in a sense, building upon that because the EU's own resources are much limited and the EU draws upon the member state resources. So you could say that it is a very later entrant into the club, but it is definitely wanting to be in the club. What does that imply? I think you would have to break it down and see is that, yes, it is recognizing that India is, expanding its footprint with multiple kind of partnerships, the Quad in particular and the Quad Summit. Then you have the exercises with France. It also means about how India is going to put out its own ideas, for example, testing where it is interpreting international law in the region. How much of traction and support will come forward to it from other states? The case in point here is when the Americans undertook an exercise, recently, and they said that, well, it is not in violation of UNCLOS, for example. So I would say that the EU definitely recognizes it is aiming to expand it. I was looking at whether a military attaché would also be, sent to Delhi soon, because that would also signal the EU's own scaling up. So there is a lot of internal scaling up which has happened, especially due to the Trump administration, where leading countries, for example, Germany and France, have put forward that the EU has to take responsibility for its own security, right? Having said that, now that we have had the new Biden administration in the White House, there has been a reaching across. And if you look at the format, we have the hybrid format of the EU plus 27. The only other country which has been privileged to this is the United States. So that also, I think, to my mind, talks about a very different kind of political messaging which is going out in the current context. It is also about, not only standing together with India, it's also about showing your political preferences on whom you want to stand with. It does not mean that tomorrow we are going, we are looking at a military deployment. But having said that, I think what is also important and come forward is that a scaling up on the military maritime, which is taking place, right? So the Indo-Pacific is not just to be located into this whole security dimension. There is the trade, the connectivity, it's about supply chains, it's about resilience, it's about sustainable climate, you name it, everything is there. For our discussion here, I'd like to flag is that, they've had the inaugural dialogue on maritime security. India has taken part in some of the maritime activities. So there's also about how the Indian Navy and the UNAFOR Atlanta can now cooperate in the Indo-Pacific region. So what I would see that is there is intentionality, there is a slow augmentation of capacity, but India would also have to then bring in more, you may not have every time a member state coming forward, with a ship over here. But if there is a better coordination, right, then showing the flag is about wanting to back your political statement. So I think there is a recognition. There was a lot of clamor from the Europeans also that the EU should come forward with its document. And I think in that sense, it is welcome, but it's still a work in progress.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another aspect from it. We'll talk about how India and EU are suddenly looking at Africa as well, and they want to, look at that market too. We tried that with Japan with the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, but it hasn't picked up like the way we wanted to. Do you see a scope for India and EU to work together in Africa?
Well, yes, I think, as you mentioned, we've already tried this with Japan, and unfortunately, the main corridor in Kenya fell apart or didn't go very far, largely because China basically undermined it. So I think one of the things we do recognize is it's very difficult to build infrastructure in third countries. But there are lots of other types of infrastructure, if you wish, that the two EU and India could work together. For example, there is resources to be done in terms of the blue economy, in terms of agriculture, in terms of telecom. Financial technology, fintech, is one of the fastest growing sectors in Africa today. And it's an area we already are pretty well accomplished given our own digital payment structure and so on. A lot of these areas in the digital, the telecom, in the software side are areas India is very good at, and they're actually very good for Africa. Low cost, don't require too much physical building of roads and railways, the way the Chinese are very good at. And these are areas where the Europeans who are already in many ways the largest foreign partner to Africa, given their past colonial history, are already in a position to help. So we have to identify places we can work together in Africa. And I know we've already begun conversations in individual European countries, notably France, on that already. But now if we can expand it to the European Union as a whole, it would be good. But I think the idea ultimately, because you have also the Blue Dot Network created by the Americans, you have, as you mentioned, a bilateral understanding with Japan. Now we have the EU, is to basically develop and align standards across these type of understandings to basically show to those countries involved that to Africa and other parts of the world that, look, what China is trying to sell you in terms of infrastructure is fundamentally going to be bad for you. And one of the big shifts one of the big focuses you're going to be seeing in all of these is climate. In other words, green energy projects, solar, wind, offshore, things like that. Because the BRI fund is enormously thermal coal driven. China, in many ways, is exporting a lot of the coal plants that it shuts down in China are effectively being exported to Africa. So 70% of the energy being created by the BRI is basically fossil fuel. We already have the International Solar Alliance, which our co-partner is France, which is designed ultimately to promote solar power in other parts of the world, including a couple of projects already in place in Africa. If we can expand that to incorporate other forms of green energy, including smart grids and so on, that'll be exactly the type of thing the EU takes seriously, and it feels that it fits in with their sort of value system, and it fits in perfectly with what India is already relatively experienced with.
Absolutely. All right, time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, the best way forward is to act, first of all, on the FTA, because that is the most ambitious project. And that is the centerpiece of the relationship, certainly from the point of view of the EU, and I dare say also India. And we heard comments from both Professor Bawa and Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary about limitations in having a military posture that is at the level of the EU. I think the serious limitations in that will remain, because whatever military posture there will be in the Indo-Pacific will be at the bilateral level, and particularly Britain, which is not in the EU, and France have capabilities and they have assets and territories in the Indian Ocean. Other countries, as far as I know, don't have these things or basing rights. So there's going to be a huge challenge out there. Where they are not like the US. They don't have that kind of capacity to deploy. So all this will be driven bilaterally. As far as Africa is concerned, well, Central Asia, we also have to think about, of course, China has gained at Russia's cost in Central Asia in terms of Belt and Road and connectivity and political influence. But what does it do with our relations with Russia? We also have to be careful, because Central Asia is an area where Russia has historic ties and interest. So the joint statement talks of current challenges, by the way. I read balanced, ambitious, comprehensive and mutually beneficial trade agreement, which would respond to current challenges. The current challenge is, of course, China. It is the unstated part. So, but as I said, for the reasons that I mentioned, there are going to be limitations on that, because the EU very clearly does not see China as a threat. They have said it very clearly in the summit itself yesterday, not in the Indo-EU summit, but in their own deliberations. They see China as a systemic challenge, but not as a threat. Just like the UK does not see China as a threat, it sees Russia as a threat, on the contrary. So for us, China is the existential problem. It is the threat. And the systemic challenge is only secondary. It's not very important for us. It's important for the other countries. They talk of Chinese autocracy versus Indian democracy, and democracy is the good model, and China's authoritarianism is the bad model. But that's not of great interest to us. Democracy is not of real interest to us. The real interest is trade, and I don't see the challenges going away. It's going to be a pretty difficult negotiation.
Absolutely. All right. Salma Bawa?
So thank you. I have 4 quick points to make. One, I would read the joint statement. When you read it carefully, I think it's now more about common interest. So for the first time, there's a pragmatic shift of moving beyond values and looking at it from a deliverables kind of a framework. I think that is important. That's the first takeaway. Second, I think there's a recognition that reinvesting in multilateralism and global institutions is the way forward. Otherwise, you're going to have a fractured lateralism, which will not deliver. The COVID has emphasized partnership, and I think investing in WHO and the One Health, which has been emphasized, I think that is something which is important to flag over here. Third, I would also want to flag over here is that while the Europeans may be moving to a carbon-free Europe, what has been said in the joint statement is about a low-carbon future. That's extremely important for us as we, come out of the pandemic and get our economy back on track. We cannot just jump onto a no-carbon. So it has to be a low-carbon. I'm very happy that it's recognized over there. The fourth point is also about the fact that there is a new political willingness on both sides to engage, and that I think is coming through in the connectivity agreement. That is a huge milestone. It is also a strategic milestone because in many ways it addresses India's concerns stemming from the neighborhood. And I would also see that both sides have moved definitely closer in order to achieve it. While it does emphasize the centrality of ASEAN in that, but I would take it as a welcome step about how both sides are looking at a more pragmatic-oriented implementation of a strategic partnership, which was first adopted in 2004.
Amit, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
So what we're seeing, I would argue, across the world is effectively coalitions of the willing, if you wish, in certain different areas. So you're seeing them, for example, in technology. 5G. India has now basically rejected China's 5G position, and we will be joined by, will be joining the US and Japan and Britain on that point of view. However, Germany, for example, has refused to go down this path so far. So on that front, for example, we will have a cluster of countries that we will work with on 5G, but Germany, for example, will not be part of that. On the Indo-Pacific maritime front, we will be working with, again, Japan, the US, France, Britain, but probably not any other European country because they don't really have a major presence here. Vaccines, we've already mentioned. On the other hand, we can probably work with almost everybody. On climate, we can work with almost everybody. So these different types of coalitions are going to be slowly built up over time and are slowly, clearly emerging. The European Union is a player in some of those, as we've mentioned, climate, potentially vaccines, and so on. And definitely various EU members will be key players in many of these sort of coalitions. In the bulk of these coalitions, not necessarily all of them, but I'd estimate 95% of these coalitions, China will not be part of them. Even Russia will slowly disappear from quite a few of them. So, but within this, the European Union is very clearly important because it is technologically advanced, because it has money, because it has a certain degree of should I say, alignment with a lot of what we're thinking about, especially on these forward-looking 21st century issues.
Absolutely. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that India and the EU are taking strides in the right direction to take several key aspects of the ties forward. Progress on an FTA is a welcome move, even though there is a long way to go. Both sides have proceeded with an eye on China. However, we can't expect too much of support from the EU on the China front because they all have a special relationship with China, that of economy, and economics trumps everything else. They're just looking at alternatives at the moment to secure their own futures, and that's why seem to be looking towards India. We will see a lot of collaboration on the vaccine front, however, between India and the EU and other like-minded countries as well. And going forward, we will witness a coalition of the willing on issues of mutual interest, with China not being a part of most of them. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get incisive content. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. Do continue to show your love and support. All this information is in the description of the video, so please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.